Chapter 13. The Wandmaker and the Thief. Draco spent most of September resting in bed. Hermione changed his bandages at first 3 times a day, then twice, and eventually stopped using the numbing solution altogether. Even when it was clear he could change his own bandages, she kept doing it herself. It was probably because of the mood around the cottage and the tent. She had hoped Ron would get used to the idea of staying friends and start to regain his warmth and humor, but instead, he seemed to withdraw more and more. Some days he could manage a few awkward sentences with her. Other days, his eyes were red and he stayed silent during their planning sessions. Harry, who never liked confrontation, was no help either. So Hermione found herself in the strange position of dreading meals with her 2 best friends, but looking forward to the hour or so she spent with Draco Malfoy. Draco could be annoying, as she had known for most of her life. He could be childish and overdramatic, but his recovery showed that most of that was just an act for effect, not who he really was. It was a kind of character he put on. Hermione started searching through the Potter's library for books about Durmstrang and Grindelwald for Draco to read, hoping to find clues about the triangular mark. Though he sighed, rolled his eyes, and complained about all he was doing for them without a thank you, he did read the books. Whenever she came in, he was flipping through them, marking pages with slips of parchment whenever something useful appeared. One book says, "The very halls of Durmstrang still bear traces of the infamous dark wizard who once walked the school," he said one day, sounding disgusted. "That has to be the mark. But they just move on. They don't actually say anything useful about it." He threw a modern history of wizarding Scandinavia onto the bed. Hermione sighed, flipping through international wizarding schools and assorted curricula in her usual spot by the window. "That's the problem with a lot of early 20th century wizarding historians," she said. "They think some details are just flavor, not really important." "Not to mention," Draco muttered, "they're so scared of seeming sympathetic to dark wizards that they don't even touch the topic." He scoffed. "It's like they think writing about dark spells means you get the bloody dark mark." Hermione turned a page, but hadn't finished the one before. She'd never heard Draco casually mention Voldemort or the Death Eaters like that before. "Speaking of which," she said carefully, "I've been meaning to ask. That protean charm, I know Voldemort can't use it to trace everyone with the dark mark, or Karkaroff wouldn't have escaped. But if he tried to summon you, could he tell you're still alive?" Draco was still looking down at his book, but she could tell he'd stopped reading. When he answered, his voice was forced casual and unconvincing. "It's not much different from a usual protean charm, Granger. When he touches his own mark, he changes the mark on whichever of our bodies he wants. It doesn't matter if that body's alive or dead." Then, more stiffly, he added, "We're just objects to him. But that means the charm would break eventually, when decay affects the charmed area." Draco looked up slowly, unsettled. "Yeah, I guess." "Well then," Hermione said, trying to sound businesslike as if discussing a routine detail, "we need to break the charm from this end at the right time. Obviously, it can't be through injury. It would have to be a major wound. But there must be an unraveling countercharm we can use. Did Dumbledore say what kind of burial you were supposed to have? Did they use embalming charms?" "Our family doesn't do that," Draco said. "The Lestranges and the Knots do, though, for their annual crypt viewings." "Crypt viewings?" Hermione asked, surprised. Draco's lip curled in amusement. "Yeah, Theo took me to one in 3rd year. They all line up and parade through the crypts. There are generations of dead Knots lying on Italian marble platforms. The oldest one's from the 15th century, but he looks like he died 5 minutes ago. They read a line from a memorial poem in blood most ancient, power most profane for each of them. It takes hours. I've never been so bored in my life." Hermione laughed in disbelief. "Are you serious?" "Deadly serious," Draco said, and they both laughed. Hermione looking up at the ceiling, Draco snickering over his book. "It costs a fortune too," he continued, "because they have to renew the embalming charms every 6 months for the whole family. It's not exactly a common charm. There are only a handful of specialists in the country. Not that Theo's family hires Brits. Egyptians are the best, obviously. They've been embalming perfectly for millennia." "That's actually kind of fascinating," Hermione said thoughtfully. "I suppose Theo would find cremation insane." Draco raised an eyebrow. "A lot of muggles burn their bodies and keep the ashes in an urn," she explained. "They what?" Draco said, staring at her. "They burn. Like on a pyre?" "No, special machines," she said. Draco looked deeply disturbed. "It's better than parading through a museum of dead people." Hermione said defensively. Yeah, well, no one's pretending the knots aren't weird, Draco said. Hermione smiled and closed her book. I'll start looking into unravelers. It's better to break the charm too early than too late, or Voldemort might get suspicious. Draco flinched. Hermione's smile faded. The taboo can't get through the Fidelius charm, she reminded him. They can only hang around outside. It's not, Draco shook his head. Never mind. Go stick that nose in a book, would you? Yes, you do the same, she said, standing. And try to finish that one quickly. I just found a set of histories about wizarding Austria. Grindelwald's campaign was especially aggressive there. It might help. Merlin's beard, Draco muttered as she headed for the door. It never ends with you, does it? But when she glanced back, his eyes were amused. September faded into October, and the trees outside turned beautiful shades of russet and gold. One afternoon, Hermione walked through the cottage and noticed how it had changed. From a gloomy shell into a cozy, inviting home with spotless floors and freshly painted walls. The photographs of the laughing, waving Potters no longer seemed so tragic. James and Lily Potter's smiling faces belonged here, in this place that had become a home again. The last room they restored was the ruined nursery. They had debated what to do with it since they arrived. In the end, instead of rebuilding the walls or fixing the roof, they covered every gap and hole with sheets of glass, turning the ceiling into a glass tent like a greenhouse. The damage to the structure remained, but sunlight now poured through the shattered areas. They collapsed the tent and moved into the cottage the very day Draco's shoulder bandages came off, revealing a scar a centimeter wide. Harry, Ron, and Hermione took the 2 bedrooms upstairs, while Draco settled in the guest room on the ground floor. Their headquarters was warm and bright, gold and red, full of sunlight and comfort. But outside, the world was growing colder and darker. About a week and a half after escaping the ministry, they heard a chilling report on the wireless. And lastly, members of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement have uncovered treachery within the ministry itself. Nymphadora Tonks, formerly an Auror, is suspected of aiding the violent attack on the ministry last week. Aurors went to her home yesterday evening, where she and her husband, werewolf Remus Lupin, resisted arrest, wounding several Aurors. Both are now at large and have been placed at numbers 4 and 5 on the ministry's undesirables list. The Auror office has also issued an alert for Tonks's mother and father, the latter a mudblood illegally possessing a wand. Both are dangerous fugitives. All 4 should be stunned or otherwise immobilized on sight. Long after the report faded from the air, the 4 sat in silence. The night was chilly, and though they had lit a fire, Hermione couldn't feel her fingertips. She felt numb, as if drained of everything. She knew this was her fault. Her brief conversation with Tonks had been enough for someone to notice. She kept replaying the moment in her mind, wondering if she could have done anything differently. She'd considered disillusioning herself, but in a bright office full of trained Aurors, she figured it would have drawn more attention than simply walking through under Polyjuice. She had to believe that was true. Where do you think they've gone? She whispered. I don't know, Harry said, his face pale. But they'd better stay hidden. If they get caught, they'll be interrogated. Or killed, Hermione thought. When she looked at Draco's pale, shaken face, she knew he was thinking the same thing. That if Tonks and Lupin died on the run, they would have traded their lives for Draco's and Hermione's. They'll be all right, Hermione said, trying to convince herself. Tonks is an Auror, and Lupin knows so much about defense. But what about the taboo? Harry said hoarsely. Lupin's always used Voldemort's name. I remember being surprised by it in our 3rd year. But Tonks must know about the taboo too. She's an Auror, Hermione said. Yaxley now heads the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, and Aurors came to investigate the scavengers when we broke the taboo there. They have to know. This is why Dumbledore shouldn't have told you about my family, Draco said, his voice hoarse. His face looked a sickly green. God, what was he thinking? If those 2 are forced to take Veritaserum, I'm done for. Not necessarily, Hermione insisted. There are ways to dodge Veritaserum, to give partial truths. Besides, the Death Eaters wouldn't even know to ask about you and your family. If they asked Tonks who else is in the Order, she wouldn't have to mention you because you never really joined. Even as she spoke, her eyes flicked to Ron. If Lupin or Tonks were interrogated, there'd be no such loopholes for the Weasleys. She felt horribly tense. Would Ron blame her? With his family at risk, would he want to know why she hadn't chosen a less risky way than talking to Tonks? Ron didn't look at her. My parents should take Ginny out of school, he said quietly. My family and Kingsley are the only Order members still openly around. Ginny should be with family, so they can go on the run quickly. Harry looked weighed down with guilt. Hermione knew he was thinking that if Ron hadn't come on the Horcrux hunt, he could be home with his family, telling them this himself. Hermione took a shaky breath. But none of this has happened yet. Lupin and Tonks are still on the run. You two and your families are still safe. I wish we could find them, Harry said. We know Tonks and Lupin. If we could just figure out where they are and bring them here. Hermione clung to the idea gratefully. That's a good plan. Definitely worth thinking about. We can add it to our brainstorming sessions. Sure, Ron said hollowly. One more thing we don't know how to do. He shook his head and stood up. He hadn't looked at her the whole time. I'm going to bed. Harry excused himself soon after. Hermione expected Draco to leave too, but he settled into a worn leather armchair they'd taken from the tent's sitting room. You don't think Tonks and Lupin are hiding at the beach house in New Cathcove, do you? Hermione asked. They'd have been caught, Draco muttered. That house would be registered with the improper use of Magic Office. It'd be under the family name. Hermione swallowed hard. I'm sorry, she said softly. Draco blinked, as if pulled out of his thoughts. For what? I should have thought of another way for us to escape the Ministry. I should have figured out another. What? Don't be ridiculous, he said, a hint of disbelief in his voice. We'd barely made it out as it was. If we'd tried to get out the front, we'd have been caught. Hermione tasted blood. She'd bitten her lip too hard. Stop it, Draco said. I'd have done the same. She finally met his eyes. You're not angry with me? He looked shocked. Granger, you stopped me from bleeding to death in a broom cupboard at the Ministry. You think I'm angry? She let out a small laugh. Right. Well. Feeling relieved, she leaned back against the sofa cushions. Also, you can stop calling me Granger all the time. One corner of his mouth twitched. Oh, can I? Do I have your Majesty's permission? Well, it makes you sound like Snape when he threatens to dock points from Gryffindor, that's all. Maybe that's why I do it. Hermione huffed. Also, your hair's gotten ridiculously long. Soon you'll look like Snape too. Draco pulled back, clearly wounded. You're giving me advice on my hair? She raised an eyebrow. Yes, Draco, I am. It wouldn't take 3 hours and 2 bottles of Sleekeasies to fix it. What? Have you never cut your own hair? It would take 5 minutes. He looked away. Pansy used to do it for me. She liked my hair. Hermione's spirits sank again. She thought of Pansy Parkinson, the girl who'd mocked her gleefully at Hogwarts, who'd said Hagrid just grunted most of the time in 5th year. But Crabbe had described Pansy as straying from the Death Eater's path. Hermione wondered if the Parkinsons had been interrogated or punished for their unintended involvement in the Horcrux quest. She wondered if Pansy herself would be punished to manipulate the family. Do you think they're all right? She asked quietly. Pansy and her family? What do you care? She was awful to you. Hermione hesitated. Another strange, casual admission. If Draco recognized that Pansy had been horrible to her, he had to recognize he had been too. She remembered the day after they returned from the Ministry when he'd said in a tight voice, I don't know what I think about those things. A halfway admission, but still. Don't get invested in this, she told herself. His beliefs weren't her responsibility. He had seemed so uncertain when he said it. He looked shaken, as if searching for an answer just out of reach. Hermione knew that a year ago, he would never have questioned the beliefs about blood status he'd grown up with. Those so-called principles everyone around him had embraced for 17 years. Yes, Hermione said carefully. She was awful to me, but maybe she's changed. People aren't only what they used to be. She saw Draco's guard rise at once, the fine lines around his silvery eyes tightening. She remembered how, in the mountains outside Hogsmeade, he'd seemed inscrutable, as if the face he'd worn for 6 years at Hogwarts had peeled away in places. That was no longer true. The boy in front of her was partly the same, but partly transformed. She could tell when he was relaxed or wary, joking or uneasy, even when he was trying to make her laugh. It struck her that he had come back to himself. With the cottage restored, they found themselves with plenty of time to brainstorm where Lupin and Tonks might have fled, and more urgently, how to steal Slytherin's locket. Unfortunately, every idea about the Horcrux ran into dead ends before they could get into details. Even if they found out where Umbridge lived, her security would be impossible to breach. Draco's injury had shown them the futility of trying to face multiple trained Aurors at once. It also seemed that only Hermione and Draco were fully committed to the hunt. She wasn't sure what to do about Ron. Sometimes he stayed silent during planning, sitting in a corner fiddling with the deluminator, a habit that had become compulsive and never left his side. Whenever she pointed out flaws in his ideas, he folded inward, as if her logic was a personal rejection. One day, his apparent effort to hold back snapped, and he snapped at her. "Where's your idea, then? Or are you just going to say everything I do is wrong now?" Hermione's voice rose thin and high. "Ron, I just told Harry his tunneling idea wouldn't work, and neither would Draco's fake raid plan. All three of you have told me my ideas won't work all week, so..." "Yeah, great." Ron jumped to his feet, his face dark and mutinous. Thank bloody Merlin we're making progress, at least. It'd be a real shame if I was doing all this for nothing. As he stormed off, shock turned to outrage in Hermione. "If he was doing all this?" she repeated, voice trembling with anger. "If he? What does he think the rest of us have been doing?" "Hermione," Harry said quietly, "calm down. Let's just..." "I will not calm down," she snapped. "I'm so sick of walking on eggshells. Why do I have to be calm if he's decided to act like this?" "Because," Draco drawled from the sofa where he lay, "this place will be a lot more livable with only one exasperating person in it, that's why." Her teeth clenched, but his words pierced her anger. It took a moment to realize why. Only one exasperating person. Draco thought Ron was behaving badly too. Draco was taking her side, while Harry stuck to neutrality. But of course, Harry only cared about being Switzerland when Ron was difficult. At Hogwarts, whenever Hermione messed up, Harry sided with Ron. Had Harry ever sided with Hermione? No. The only rift in Harry and Ron's friendship was when they fought each other. Even Ginny, who often fumed over Ron's old-fashioned ways, was too loyal to say Ron was wrong in fights with Hermione. Maybe this was why Hermione had felt so alone during the Lavender situation last year. She had been in love with Ron and heartbroken. A consuming thing. And everyone around her belonged to his life first, and hers second. She couldn't help but appreciate having another friend now. Someone who would take her side without worrying about annoying Ron. "Fine," she said, sitting back down before the sheet of parchment covered with crossed-out ideas. "Let's keep thinking about possible diversions, then." But Ron wasn't the only one distracted. Harry spent long hours wandering the house, brushing his hands over old furniture in a way that told Hermione exactly what he was thinking. He was reading the life and lies of Albus Dumbledore, too. Very slowly, clearly not enjoying it. He seemed to resent every bit of information that Rita Skeeter had uncovered and Dumbledore hadn't told him personally. Then, in mid-October, Hermione heard a shout from Harry's room around 11 at night. They all rushed from their bedrooms and gathered in the living room. Draco's hair was mussed and crackling with static. Harry looked wild-eyed. "What is it?" Hermione asked. "What happened? Was it your scar?" Ron demanded. "Did you see anything?" "Is my family." "It's not that. Look." Harry held out the life and lies of Albus Dumbledore, open to a photograph of a young Dumbledore, wiry and auburn-haired, with his arm around a blonde, handsome, mischievous-looking youth. The caption read, "Albus Dumbledore, shortly after his mother's death, with his friend Gellert Grindelwald." Hermione, Ron, and Draco stared at the words. Draco spoke first. "Grindelwald? His friend?" Ron said, stunned. Harry swallowed hard. It was the summer after his last year at Hogwarts. The summer his sister died. There's a letter here between them. Dumbledore was... Harry looked lost, betrayed. He and Grindelwald were planning together. When they were our age, he was helping Grindelwald make plans to rule Muggles. "No way," Ron breathed, taking the book from Harry's hand. "But that's not. The thing is..." "That photograph," Harry interrupted. "That picture of Grindelwald. Grindelwald is who Voldemort's been hunting." "What?" Hermione said. "What do you mean? I told you about the thief Voldemort saw in Gregorovitch's memory, right? Voldemort's been looking for the thief for months, but doesn't know who he is. It's him." Harry tapped Grindelwald's face. But Grindelwald must have stolen it from Gregorovitch decades ago, for him to look this young in that memory. "What's it, though?" Ron asked impatiently, putting the book aside. "I don't know," Harry said. "Being a wand maker's involved," Draco drawled. "You don't think it could be a wand, Potter?" "Obviously I've thought of that," Harry said through clenched teeth. "I thought Voldemort was after wand makers because of what my wand did over the summer. About the connection between our wands, the twin cores. But when Voldemort interrogated Gregorovitch, he didn't ask about connected wands. He just kept asking, 'Where is it? Where is it?'" Harry shook his head hard. Besides, he wasn't using his own wand during the summer. I saw the one he held. He'd taken someone else's. So, if he's already tried using a different wand against me, and mine still beat him somehow, why try another? Why would it make a difference? Hermione shook her head. She wanted to tell Harry he was being ridiculous, to stop claiming his wand had beaten Voldemort on its own, when it was clearly his own magic working unconsciously. But they'd argued enough about it already. Maybe Gregrovich has a special tool for making wands, Ron suggested. Maybe you know who wants to make his own wand, because he thinks it'll be better. Hermione wanted to snap, what do you mean better? But she hesitated. She didn't want to push Ron away again. As she paused, she began to rethink. Wizards had often boasted their wands were stronger than others, hadn't they? She'd read about it in a history of magic. It was nonsense, of course. The wand was only as powerful as its wizard. But there's always a chance, she said, unable to hide her skepticism, that Voldemort believes one of those stories about extra-powerful wands. Ron and Harry stared at her blankly. Oh, come on, you two, she huffed. Professor Binns mentioned them over and over. What wands? Ron interrupted. Before Hermione could answer, Draco began listing them on his fingers. The Wand of Destiny, the Godhammer, the Wand of Ages, the Death Stick. He raised an eyebrow at their surprise. Favorite topic among Slytherins. Did you say the Death Stick? Ron repeated. Yeah, Draco said. Elarion the Unquiet named his wand that. It's the most recent of them. About 150 years ago. The Death Stick, Harry echoed. That sounds like something Voldemort would be interested in. He frowned. But I don't understand how one wand could be better than another. Hermione sighed. They can't be. It's all just rumor. These wizards wanted to seem fearsome, so they claimed their wands were more powerful than others. Harry thought for a moment. But if Voldemort believes one of them is real, and he thinks he's found it, that could explain a lot. Maybe Grindelwald believed it too. Maybe that's why he stole this wand from Gregrovich. Because he thought it was powerful. And now Voldemort's chasing Grindelwald to get it. Good, Hermione said, lifting her hands. Let him chase after it. As long as he's on a wild goose chase, he's not here terrorizing people. Ron frowned. We're sure it's a wild goose chase, right? There's no chance this wand will really help you know who. Hermione sighed, exasperated. Of course not. A wand is only as good as the wizard who wields it. No wand in history has ever given its owner a real advantage. We shouldn't waste time worrying about this or what Voldemort is doing. If he's off chasing the Death Stick, it gives us free rein to hunt the Horcruxes. Hermione, Harry said impatiently. How can you say that doesn't mean anything? Dumbledore left you Grindelwald's sign in that book. He wrote it himself. Now we find out Voldemort's chasing Grindelwald? You really think that's a coincidence? Hermione bit her lip and sat on the arm of the sofa as Harry paced. It did feel like more than a coincidence, but the picture was still unclear. There was something they weren't seeing, something they didn't fully understand. Hang on, Ron said suddenly excited. I'll be right back. He ran up the stairs, and the others sank back into their tangled thoughts. Maybe, Draco said after a moment. Dumbledore wanted you to get that wand. That's an idea, Harry said slowly. Maybe the sign means we're supposed to beat Voldemort to Grindelwald and ask him about the wand before Voldemort can. Yes, but why wouldn't Dumbledore have just told us that? Hermione said, frustrated. He never mentioned a special wand before. It must relate to the Horcruxes. I don't think this wand has any. Ron's footsteps thundered back down the stairs. They all looked up. Hermione's heart sank. Ron was holding Ravenclaw's diadem. I think it's time to bring this out again. No, Hermione and Draco said at the same time. Why not? Harry asked, confused. It helped with the Fidelius charm, didn't it? And it gave us the idea for the basilisk fangs. I think it's a good idea, Ron. Go on, put it. You can't. Hermione burst out. A long, tense silence followed. Ron lowered the diadem, eyes sharp and suspicious. What's wrong? Harry asked. Hermione glanced at Draco, who gave a small, reluctant nod, as if to say, well, I suppose we have to. Harry, Ron, Hermione said quietly, her mouth dry. I didn't stop wearing the diadem because I thought it would let Voldemort into the Fidelius charm. I stopped because it was taking me over. Harry stared at her. Ron's eyes were on her too, but she couldn't meet his gaze. She looked down at her slippered feet and whispered, It made me sleepwalk to it at night, when I was vulnerable. It made me think awful things about myself and about. Hermione, why didn't you tell us any of this? Harry's voice was frightened and confused. Why didn't you say it was affecting your thoughts? It convinced me the thoughts were mine. Because it was everything I'm. Her nose burned and her eyes grew hot. She didn't want to cry. It was stupid. But how did you stop it? Ron's voice was quiet, hoarse. I didn't, she sniffled, wiping her eyes with her sleeve. It was Draco. He realized what was happening and kept it away from me the night before I did the Fidelius charm. We had a system so I couldn't get to it at night. She looked at Draco. He looked stiff, uncomfortable, arms folded. He knew. Ron said, shocked. What? He knew. Malfoy knew all along about your thoughts changing and the sleepwalking, but you couldn't tell us? Hermione looked at Ron. The diadem gleamed in his hands. His face showed panic, defensiveness, and anger. She understood immediately. Ron felt guilty that Voldemort had possessed her under his nose, and he couldn't accept he hadn't noticed. It had to be her fault. Draco's voice cutting quietly and dangerously. You don't know what you're talking about, Weasley. Ron ignored him, voice rising and face reddening. I thought we were supposed to be your friends. Hermione glanced at Harry, who looked just as shocked and betrayed. Her clarity dissolved. Panic flooded in, like falling back under the diadem's spell, the raw fear that she was about to lose her friends forever. You are, she said desperately, looking between them. Of course you are, Ron. Don't be ridiculous. Don't tell me I'm ridiculous. You're the one who kept this from us for months. That's only because I was afraid you'd think I. You told him, Ron snapped, pointing at Draco. But it wasn't like that. Hermione's voice rose. I just told you. He found me sleepwalking. He figured it out first. It wasn't my choice. Ron let out a harsh laugh. Oh yes, it was. Maybe not at first, but every day since then it was. What if I'd put this thing on and got possessed, huh? He shook the diadem, glittering madly in the light, shouting. Or Harry, would you have cared enough to tell us the truth then? His words hit hard. Hermione took a step back. Harry found his voice. Ron, that's out of order. Ron didn't even seem to hear him. There was a cruel, bitter satisfaction on his face that made him look like a stranger. Spots of reflected light from the diadem danced over his freckles. You didn't think of us at all, did you? He yelled, his voice wild with frustration that had clearly been building for weeks. Why would we matter? Or have you been working with the Horcrux all along? You've been keeping secrets with a Death Eater, after all. Heat flooded Hermione's body, and her shock exploded into a fierce, incoherent roar of rage. Her vision blurred, heart pounding. How could he say that? How could he suggest that not confessing her struggles meant she was helping Voldemort, when more than anyone, she was the one Voldemort's regime wanted to eliminate? And how dare he imply Draco was still a Death Eater, less than a month after he nearly died helping them? All this, on top of the humiliation that Draco, not her best friends of 7 years, had been the one to sense something was wrong with her. It all overwhelmed her in an instant, and she screamed back, "This is why, Ron." A heavy silence fell over the room. Ron's face drained of color until the skin beneath his freckles was as pale as a cloud. His shoulders hunched forward as if punched in the chest. Hermione didn't know where the words had come from, or why she had said them, but they were true. This kind of anger, bitter, destructive, ugly, felt like being back in 3rd year after Scabbers, or 4th year after the Obal, or 6th year when she'd seen him with Lavender. The pain they inflicted on each other. This was why it wasn't right. Ron was breathing fast now. He looked disoriented, as if coming out of a trance. His eyes shifted first to Harry, then Draco. His hand reached uncertainly for an end table and dropped the diadem, which gleamed like a pair of watchful eyes. Ron swayed as it slipped from his grip. I can't do this, he said hoarsely. I'm done. He turned sharply, the sound of a crack splitting the air behind him, and he was gone.